Hey everybody, it's Kyle from Young Legends Street Hockey. I have another fantastic guest with me today, Mr. Brian Lomax, who is a sports psychologist, or now more importantly, a performance coach. How do you get the maximum performance out of your goals or whatever you're trying to achieve, whatever athletic you're going for, maybe even in the corporate world, you're trying to get better numbers in sales or whatever you're looking to do to become the best you can be. Brian is one of those individuals that has the skills and knowledge to help you get there. Just a little bit about Brian. He is an author of The Mentally Tough Competitor, Mindsets and Perspectives to Achieve Excellence. He works with a variety of athletes. Most of these athletes are very motivated to get to the next level or to become the best athletes they possibly can. He's a certified tennis professional. He's coached at Boston College and Bryant University. So Paul Russo, if you're watching this guy now works with your alma mater. He also helps other programs. He's actually helped Bryant and BC appearing in their NCAA tournaments. And I'm going to somehow get a link, Brian, so that we have your website. He's also the founder of Performance Extra. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining me today. And I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, Carl, thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to talk to you and to all the people who participate, in the things that you do.
Thank you. So we're gonna get right into it. Tell us a little bit about Brian's athletic career from, well, we know you're a tennis guy, but what did you do growing up for sports and athletics, and where is it taking you now?
Yeah, so tennis, I don't think that was really my first sport. My first love was baseball. And, I'm 52. So when I was growing up, one of the first memories I have was of Hank Aaron chasing Babe Ruth's home run record. And the first baseball game I went to was when I was 6, 1974. We went to see the Atlanta Braves play the New York Mets in Shea Stadium in New York. Got to see Hank Aaron play live that year. So that was cool. But yeah, baseball was my first love. Tennis came into play when I was around 6, 7 years old. I started playing, got more serious around 8 to 10, and then things took off from there. I think baseball was really the only other organized sport I played, but like I told you, I played a lot of street hockey. I would have loved to have played ice hockey, Carl, but I only have one kidney, and so my parents were like, nope, no contact sports. They did everything they could to make sure I didn't play hockey. But, I played a ton of street hockey, as a kid and all through high school. We had a lot of places to play where I grew up in Rhode Island. So that was certainly one of my favorite sports. Loved basketball, played a lot of basketball in the driveway, but never really played organized. And I would say, at 13, I had to make a decision. Because going into high school, the two sports I really liked to play were baseball and tennis. They're both spring sports.
Right, it makes sense.
In Rhode Island. Right. And I just felt like the individual nature of tennis kind of went along a little bit more with my personality. I liked to be out there on my own. I liked, being in charge, making those decisions. And I felt I was probably a little bit better at that sport.
At tennis.
Yeah. So, that continued on through high school and college and into my adult, life. I've really, up until recently been competing a lot, whether that's in team events or tournaments.
Interesting. And you had mentioned this about you like sort of that soul sport. I think for me personally, playing hockey all my life, I didn't get into really the solo sport of golf until I was I started playing competitively in a men's league with my dad. But I was like, I really love the mental battle of golf, because it's just you and the course. It really shows, you can show a lot of strength and block out distractions. But I always wonder, if I had gotten more involved in golf at a younger age, would I have chose golf over hockey? I don't know the answer to that. Probably not. But I've really enjoyed golf in that setting. because it's just you versus the course. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
the course is coming at you and you have to find a way to get over it. So, um, have you been more introverted or extroverted as
I
a
would say more, yeah, as an athlete myself, definitely more introverted. I did love my team experiences, but if you think about baseball, it's not quite the same from a team perspective as, say, a hockey or a basketball. Hockey is very much a flow sport. You're constantly interacting with each other, where baseball is a very stop and start sport. The amount of cooperation that goes on is not nearly the same.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
a ball is hit into the field. Let's say the shortstop. All right, you pick it up, you throw it to first, and that kind of ends the whole cooperation thing.
that's
The
true.
pitcher and the catcher are doing a lot of that, right? But baseball is almost like a series of individual performances over the course of 6 or 9 innings. But I did love my team experiences as well. But there was just something about kind of being out there on my own. I like that kind of autonomy and ownership of
Yeah,
the whole. It's not that I don't love team sports, because I love that feeling too. Because in even in a sport like tennis, you do get a sense of team when you're playing in high school and college. So we would call that a co-active sport versus an interactive team sport, right? Hockey would be interactive because we're all meshing together. Tennis would be co-active because we're taking my result and adding it up to your result to the number 3 guy's result, and then we come up with a team score. Track would be similar to that. But even still, in that environment, you did feel like you were playing for something bigger than yourself. So you were kind of able to combine that ownership and autonomy of what you're doing out there, but then also being able to cheer for your teammates and know you're contributing to something bigger.
absolutely. That's a great point. And one thing that I had talked, we do a monthly newsletter with Young Legends.
Yeah.
Sometimes the article varies from the April newsletter was on the Pomodoro technique, which is you set your timer for 25 minutes, work for 25 minutes, and then take a break.
Yeah.
Just people are home working. How do you be more productive? It's a nice little way to set a timer and see what you can work on in that 25 minutes. But I wrote about how playing different sports can actually build different skills, which you're probably a big fan of anyway. But one of the things that as a hockey player, as a team, like you had mentioned, we're all shooting for the same goal. And yeah, we
Yeah.
might have an individual goal, such as I want to score 50 goals in a season or whatever. But if I had played a little bit more golf as a kid, I
Mm-hmm.
may have learned to, because in these single sports, it's just you.
Yeah.
There's nobody else you can rely on. And then when you get to your career, to increase your performance, it's all on you. It's not, you might be part of a team, but for someone like me, as a financial advisor, I have numbers that I have to hit. And if I don't perform, that's on me. And so, what I'm trying to say, Brian, to you is I wish that I had a little bit more individual sports as a kid, because I think it would have developed a different skill in me, that reliance on myself.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to that also,
Yeah.
even on the physical side, even from like a neurological perspective. And they did an interesting study. We'll stick with tennis for a second here. They did an interesting study on the top 50 male players in the world in the ATP tour. And because they were getting into this idea of early specialization, like, should you specialize early,
Good,
you
great
know?
question. Yeah, great question.
And because I think, sometimes as parents or coaches, we want the kid to play 24/7, 365-hour sport, right? Of the 50, there was not one player who focused on tennis solely before the age of 13. They all played other sports up
Interesting.
until 13. It was at 13 that the majority of them transitioned to then focusing on tennis. But you look at like a Rafael Nadal was an excellent soccer player. Same with Roger Federer. They all played other sports. And one of the things that the science is telling us on that is that those other sports actually teach really important skills that you may not learn in your, one sport. So for example, let's think about hockey or even like ice hockey. And this is something I've noticed with kids who transition from hockey to tennis. They all have fabulous footwork.
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily come naturally just by specializing in tennis. Same with a lot of the soccer kids, so that develops. Another thing that might develop, say, from a basketball player is the idea of peripheral vision, right? Kind of seeing like who's defending you, who's coming at you in different segments. Certainly hockey and soccer can help with that. But that would be a useful skill in other sports as well, right? The ability to see outside here and not just have a more narrow vision.
Absolutely. And from your perspective of a tennis player and from a hockey perspective, that ability to move laterally,
yeah,
being able, you're crossing over side to side. That's so crucial to the development of an ice hockey player. They've said in the past, Brian, that the United States hockey player is so good going vertical.
Yeah.
And the Europeans then have a better way of, moving cross ice, horizontal. And it's all,
Europeans also have a larger ice surface too, right? So it might even be more necessary.
It's a different game too with that bigger ice surface. Speed and you got to have a little bit open where the North American game is more hitting each
more physical.
You got it. So I think I even mentioned tennis in that article that I wrote, was saying tennis, play tennis just to get that lateral motion side to side. And be able to react quickly too. Tennis.
Yeah. So that might even be something, your young athletes think about. Let's say they're not getting some of that other sport experience. Can you be doing some functional training?
Yeah.
On the side, whether that's using like an agility ladder,
right,
that teach those different steps, because I think very often I'll look at a tennis player or any athlete and just say, that kid just needs to become a better athlete first. Doesn't have that foundation yet, and once you have that foundation, then you can obviously go higher in your potential. But, if you don't have like sort of the proper footwork patterns or movements, you're restricting your own ceiling of potential.
Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that too. I was one of those kids that chose hockey. I played baseball growing up, played some soccer, not much. Tried football, got my butt. But I tend to try, we played a lot in the yard too, though. We played different sports in the yard, which, developed. And I know, my sister Candace. So, Candace will tell you that she's the best athlete of the family. So,
I've heard that.
Yeah, you multiple times with Candace, but I'm fortunate enough that I got to, play. They helped me become a better player too. So, one of the things that you and I had got a chance to talk about offline a little bit was, in today's world, everybody, there's big emphasis on working out, getting into shape, having a good diet. What's the best equipment? You know what I mean? Like the best tennis rackets in the world.
Yeah.
Even in golf, it's what's my driver look like? Hockey sticks and skates are so light now. But nobody seems to focus, especially at the youth level, what's going on between the ears. And tell us a little bit about sports psychology or even performance, increasing your performance. Tell us a little bit about that field and what you do on a daily basis.
Okay. Yeah. And, sport psychology is also kind of rebranding itself into sport and performance psychology, so that it's not just about sports. It could be for other performing artists, musicians, dancers, etc. And also getting into the, business and corporate realms of things. Because I recently wrote something, that we discussed about, a corporate athlete, someone who works in an office, but you know what, you need to manage your energy and get to results just the same as anybody else.
Absolutely.
In the world, Absolutely. And I think when we look at, sports psychology, there are different approaches to sort of different age levels as well as different ability levels. But when I think of like, sort of like the youth level going forward, very often when I'm working with younger athletes, it's really about helping them develop good perspectives on how to handle challenges, mistakes, losses, failure, but also um, reframe how they think about pressure, reframe how they think about opponents, even winning. Because if we can develop, healthier perspectives on things like that, especially between the ages of say 11 and 15, they're going to be much better set up to handle high school sports and college sports. It's almost like, think of the brain like an electrical closet. And you want that closet to be nice and well organized. Like when you open it, you know where everything is, everything is like wired correctly. But, the athlete who doesn't have that, let's say they're 20 years old and they have grown up with, perhaps maladaptive perspectives. You open up that closet and it's just a complete mess. And so now what are you doing? You're ending up rewiring things, which is a lot harder to do than kind of like organizing from the beginning. So, I think, in a lot of the population age-wise that you're dealing with young legends, it's a great opportunity for them to be learning kind of like the best ways of thinking about the challenges of sport, the adversity that comes with it, what it can teach us about our character, and how we can maybe even use sport as a means of training our character to be better, right? Not only to be better performers, but better teammates, better members of the hockey community, better members of the community we live in, so I think that's kind of like, mostly of what I do is I work with a lot of athletes sort of between that 11 to 18 range.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a great age because in general, if you can get an athlete who is open-minded to learning about these things, and you just give them a little bit of success, a little couple of things that they can work on. And I think that other than really perspectives and mindsets, a lot of what we work on with them is confidence and self-belief, especially with female athletes. They have generally a little bit lower confidence than they should. So we try to develop more of that, especially on the self-belief side, believing they can win, believing they can achieve their goals. Then the other part of confidence is, trusting your abilities. So let's say you're in a pressure moment in a game. You don't want to be overthinking your technique or you just want to kind of let your performance go. Let the automatic execution of that happen. I think another big aspect to help young athletes and what we train them on is their focus, the ability to kind of stay in that present moment. Don't beat yourself up maybe for something that happened a few minutes ago. Try not to be thinking too much about later, maybe in the game, or how it's going to be great to talk about the win afterwards with your parents. You got to stay in that moment, right? So focus is a big part. And then also with focus, learning to choose what you can control. So, what are the things that you can control? And I think those are, I would say those are kind of like the big things that we go into, and then work with athletes, on their more specific issues. But those are like the big themes.
That's a really impressive statement, what you just said, because I'm in my own mind, I'm thinking about how I needed someone like you back when I was in, the middle school, that high school range.
I needed it too, Carl. I mean, I was a psycho.
We probably, and the thing is back, I was in high school, playing my career 99, I think, to 03. That was sort of my high school career. When I was at Austin Prep, I actually played, they took me on as an 8th grader on the varsity team, which I probably had no business being on, but I was good enough to play there. But mentally, I was the maturity level of very much.
Right. I can understand even just the mental. We could probably classify as mental and emotional, right? So even emotionally, you're not on the same page at all.
Yeah, not even on the same level. Going from O'Malley Middle School to Austin Prep, going into a state tournament as an eighth grader with the crowds being bigger, like
Yeah.
my anxiety, Brian, was through the roof. And I had unrealistic expectations. And one of the things that I've been doing, I know you're an author, and I actually enjoy writing, although sometimes it's hard to put a nice block of time together where you can write straight, especially with kids. But I've been talking about my journey with young legends and
Yes.
starting the game from starting the program from zero all the way to where it is now. We're trying to build a rink. And one of the things that I came into, and not to divulge my emotional thing on here, is that I struggled a lot with performance anxiety.
Mm.
I was very, very nervous, amped up before games. I'm also a perfectionist, and people say, "Oh, that's a great thing." But my perfectionism was actually hindering my performance because
Yeah.
I would make a mistake, and then mentally I'd be like, I wouldn't be. It would take me out of the game almost. Of course, not to that extreme, but it had a major impact on my performance.
Sure.
So everything that you're saying is, I mean, I encourage kids to work with someone other than their parents. You know what I mean? To get a different perspective, like you said, reframing is the word you use that I think is
Right.
so important. So um, it's like I said, during those times, sports psychologists or performance coaches weren't really mainstream at that time. Now it's becoming more mainstream, right?
Right. And I'm glad that you hit on that performance anxiety, because that's another one. I don't know how you feel. I feel so. I'm older than you. I went to high school in the '80s, and so even sports psychology was less of a thing
Yeah,
back then. But I also feel like the current environment we're in for youth sports, I feel like it's more difficult than it was when I was growing up. Right? I'm a pre-internet, athlete. But today, everybody's results are online.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the recruiting for college athletics is so much more serious now than it used to be. The ability to compare yourself to somebody else is so much easier with social media, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, whatever. You're getting sort of that immediate feedback. Um, and so, and especially at a time like this, Carl, I don't know if, you got any kids who are, thinking about college athletics, but the whole thing is like shut down,
yeah,
right? The recruiting aspect of it. So there's a ton of uncertainty going on with kids who are especially like sophomores and juniors in high school.
yeah,
And they can't be out there competing and affecting their record.
absolutely.
It's basically frozen in time. Um, so I think, helping athletes deal with anxiety, whether that's, I mean, there are different ways of doing that. Some of it's through perspectives, but some of it's through things like relaxation training, through visualization, through maybe more exposure to some of those situations that produce anxiety. But that could be something, for young legends, as if any of your athletes are facing some, anxiety or stress management issues, right? That definitely a reason to be looking into some things to do with sports psychology and helping with that.
We have we have a strong ice hockey population in the street hockey program,
Yeah.
which makes sense to me because uh, street hockey is a great way to train, stick handling ability. You're still getting some sort of connection with your stick. It's also great. It's great way to be outside during the summer as opposed to being in a rink. And I like I said, I like what you said earlier about don't feel guilty if you're playing other sports. It's okay to do that. I think,
Yeah.
but we have some really solid players that have come through the program that are in high school right now that are playing for the high school team. And, sometimes I wonder, I will say that the Gloucester High School coach is actually very good about getting them prepared physically and mentally. I think I've had some conversations with him. But sometimes I wonder where some of the athletes that are coming through our program, what their goal is. Do they want to just play for the high school team? Do they want to go on and play college? I mean, we've had kids that have gone on and play college hockey that have come through our program. Sometimes I wonder what goals are for the parents too. What would they like for their child too? So I wish I had a better, because people look at us as we're a summer opportunity, and I'm curious to sometimes wonder what their goals are and how we can help them get to be. And even if it's not hockey, maybe it's baseball, and lacrosse now is becoming a big
Yes.
sport in my hometown of Gloucester. But and that was something that I may have played over baseball if, who knows, although I loved, after being banged up all winter, I loved going out on the baseball field and not have to be checked. You know what I mean?
Right.
But can you talk a little bit about that goal setting piece, a little bit for athletes, not even at youth, but even for adults too? How do you goal set, and what's a healthy way to do it?
Yeah. That's funny. I'm doing a webinar in a couple of weeks on goal setting for the USTA New England organization. And I think you're right. It's not just about sports, but we can use it we can maybe take an example from a sport and can apply it to anything really. I think first of all, with goal setting, you have to understand that there are different types of goals. We have outcome or result goals, right? So, an outcome or result goal might be like, I win something, or, I achieve my dream of being recruited by a Division I school. That's an outcome. Then there's a performance goal, which would be more like of a metric. So think of yourself as like maybe a basketball player, and you want to have, a certain field goal percentage from, either 3-point area or not, right? And maybe you want it to be over 50%, right? So that would be a performance goal, and then you would measure whether you hit that or not. And then lastly, we have what are called process goals. Process goals are the ones that are the most controllable.
Okay.
Because something like a win over somebody is not really controllable. You certainly have influence over it, but you can't really control winning a game or winning a tennis match. Somebody else is involved in not letting you win, right? And same with a performance goal. Usually there's a little less control there. But a process goal might be, all right, today when I go to practice, I want to focus on my footwork. Or today, maybe it's a strength of mine, right? Maybe there's a particular thing that I'm really good at, but I know I could be better at it, even though it's like my strength. I want to focus on that, right? And the more specific those process goals can be, then the more focused your work can be in, say, a practice. So, yeah, so let me just stop there and see if you have any thoughts on those goals.
I wanted to ask you, because you're talking about practice. There's always been the debate of quality versus quantity, in this idea of this deliberate practice where I'm focusing on maybe a process. For example, maybe like you had lateral motion or something like that. I'm thinking of I'm going to hit my driver today off the tee. That's really what I'm going to focus on in that sort of instant feedback. I don't know where my question's going, Brian, as I think about this, but what's in that case where you have a process, how do you feel about deliberate practice and sort of making sure, how do you get a youth athlete to get in that mindset?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love deliberate practice. I'm glad to use that term. That's the Anders Ericsson approach, right, to excellence. So what I do is when I'm working with individual athletes, I have them start a training journal, but I have them start really simple, because I don't want that to be like a stumbling block to what we're doing. So all they do with this training journal to begin with is they write down 2 to 3 things that they want to focus on in practice.
Okay.
And they do that before the practice. And we talk about, what are good things to focus on. And very often I'll let them do it on their own first, and then we'll see how they do. And then we may adjust, right? Because some athletes might say, it wouldn't be like this necessarily, but they might put a don't in there. Like, okay, don't mess up this. Well, that's hard to do, right? I mean, because it's not a do, right? So we try to talk about, okay, what are the right ways to set those little process goals? So for me as a tennis player, I might say, all right, today I'm going to work on my inside out forehand and trying to dominate points with that. Now, that's very specific. It's got purpose. And then I can evaluate afterwards how it went. So, the first step in getting somebody to do deliberate practice is set those 2 to 3 goals. And then after practice, come back and just rate themselves 1 to 10. How'd I do? And then we start to see the numbers, over the course of a week or a couple weeks and how they're trending. I'll very often also give them some mental, emotional things to focus on, real basics, body language, awareness of their breathing, and then, awareness and the productivity of their self-talk. And I'll ask them to do 1 to 10 on those things as well. And over time, we try to become more deliberate about how we want those 3 things to look.
Okay.
All right. And then, so then they'll rate those 1 to 10. Then after a few weeks, we start layering in, okay, I want you to ask yourself some reflection questions now after practice. Well, what did I do well? What could have been better today? What needs work? What did I learn today that maybe I could bring to tomorrow's practice or tomorrow's game? That way we're starting to get that feedback loop into, all right, I know when I'm hitting, let's say you with the driver. I know when I'm hitting a driver and I do this maybe little thing in my routine where I take a breath before I start the backswing, that I hit it better. So tomorrow I'm really going to focus on that cleansing breath before I start my backswing, right? So you took something you learned today, now you're applying it to tomorrow, and maybe you get even another leap in improvement. So I think this kind of concept of deliberate practice can really help you improve more versus somebody who just kind of goes out and practices. They may be doing a lot of the right things, but they're not necessarily processing what's going on and reflecting on it, because this is truly a learning experience. So you're going to learn more deeply if you kind of reflect on, all right, what did I just experience? And maybe now how can I use that information to make myself better?
Absolutely.
I think that's probably, to me, that's like the beauty of deliberate practice.
I think even a lot of the coaches that we have are our high school kids that are volunteering. And we've tried to incorporate a little bit more of self-autonomy with them.
Good.
And we have some coaches that really thrive, and they take it by the reins, and they're off and running. There's other ones that aren't comfortable. They're not there yet. They want to be an assistant coach. They're going to follow the leader, and they're going to learn from that. Fine with us. One of the things that we've been preaching as a management group is, if you are going to have a team practice, come with a plan, come with an actual practice plan. And because we only have one team practice a year. It's not like, and then we have our individual skill sessions that are optional. And a lot of people take advantage of this stuff. But I love running the skill sessions. A lot of our staff will tell you that. But when I go in, I have a plan in mind of what we're going to do. It's written out. And I don't know if, when I was growing up, my expectation, Brian, was I'm going to be Bobby Orr. I'm going to be Wayne Gretzky.
That sounds easy.
Yeah, I'm going to be, and that's what I am. But I used to shoot, 150 pucks almost every day. Not every day. It wasn't consistent. But it would be the same thing, trying to pick individual corners of the net with milk jugs and things like that. But as deliberate as that was, I didn't really have a process. I had somewhat of a process, but it was never really as focused as it could be. Some days it was just blasting the shot as hard as I could. So I think that, like, Tiger Woods always talks about how his dad had a process with him, and the military uses processes too. And even in my career now, as a financial advisor, I now have a process that I use with every single client, and you know what I mean? But I don't know if youth hockey coaches have I don't know if they have a process for their players. I don't know if.
Yeah, or a process likely exists, whether that's with USA Hockey or
Yeah.
Hockey Canada, those types of things. It's whether those processes make their way down,
Okay.
and so that coaches know what to do. I think you're right. Like if you're a coach, you definitely want to have a plan. Although at a certain point, if you had, let's say, more practices, let's say you kind of driving some of these teams more like an academy team.
Yeah.
You probably, as they get older and older, you want to shift some of that autonomy actually to the players, to go from what we would call, say, a player-centered environment, right? Where, we're doing these things to help you become, this great hockey player, this great soccer player.
Interesting.
But then learning to teach them along the way to take more ownership of what's going on. Hey, you go set up the nets. All right, you're in charge of, making sure all the equipment is here. Giving them little tasks. Then ultimately getting them down to, okay, what do you guys think we should work on today? We've got a big game on Saturday, based on who we're playing. What are some things that we should put into our practice plan today? And then giving them the opportunity to kind of speak up and talk about that. Now they're demonstrating more autonomy, more ownership in that process, right? They're going to be more invested in the practice at some point.
That's excellent.
And so I think, you're seeing a lot of like soccer academies really take that path of learning to, but so especially like in England where they've got these big clubs, say like Liverpool or Manchester United, they start their academies at like 8, 9 years old. The idea is that they grow the player to, eventually hit their first team. Mm-hmm. I was actually listening to a podcast recently with the guy who directs the academy for AFC Wimbledon, which is not a big club, but they have a nice academy.
Yeah.
And that's their philosophy, is that they want to be able to have the players really take some ownership. And he told a really cool story about how they were, as a team, they were traveling to a site, and one of the team vans got stuck in horrible traffic. And the majority of the coaching staff was in that van. There was only one coach who was with all these other players that actually got to the stadium. And so what they saw is like the kids took over. The players took over.
Interesting.
And, one of them was just like, all right, you go set up those nets, go get the balls. We got to do this in practice. We got to get organized, et cetera. And the coach was just like, just letting it go. And it was just like a really, good validation of the culture that they had created, because it wasn't like, okay, coach, what should we do?
Right. And
so that's kind of cool. Then those guys can then grow up to be excellent coaches themselves, right? Because they get that ownership part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great story. I was trying to think if we've had that with our players a little bit. We try to have our older kids, our 8th graders, become more of the leaders out there and, pick up the younger players if there's a struggle. I did want to ask you this. This is something that, is always been interesting to me. How can you help a player overcome plateauing? And is there a magical process?
Well, I guess there's a lot of layers to that one, Carl, right? So, because hitting a plateau is not necessarily an indication that something is wrong, right? So let's kind of talk about, say, where you are in your development curve. Because the better you get, the more plateaus you're going to hit. Right? The better you get, the less room there is to go higher. So your incremental jumps are going to be, smaller and probably fewer. So being on that plateau in that sense might be actually an indication that, hey, I've gotten really good. I just need to kind of keep doing what I'm doing. Eventually I'll get a bump. All right. So that's one aspect of plateaus. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Depending on where you are. Now, some plateaus we might diagnose and say, like, go back to our earlier discussion. Well, this person is plateaued because their athletic skills are holding them back. They pretty much maxed out maybe where they are because their footwork is not that good, or they're just not that good of an athlete, and might have to go back and work on some of those things. So that might be a one plateau that could occur. Another one could be just like a mental block, right? Where thinking that you should be improving, putting so much pressure on yourself, maybe going back to what you were saying about perfectionism.
Yeah.
And certainly perfectionism is something that could cause someone to improve less at some point, right? Because I think there's some good things about perfectionism.
Right.
One is that you're holding yourself to high standards, but the maladaptive type of perfectionism thinks you can actually be perfect.
Right.
Where that's not reality, right? So that's kind of a level of irrational thinking. And so if you're thinking that way, then it's going to be awfully hard to be improving because you're always giving yourself a hard time for mistakes. But let's face it, as human beings, we learn through mistakes. Especially mistakes of like trying the right thing. It's one of those things, like even in golf, you kind of have to suck at golf first before you get good at it.
Right.
But if you think you're going to just show up one day, new clubs, and you're going to shoot 72, your first time out, that's not rational. But if you're trying, then from a brain perspective, you're laying down some neural pathways and they need reinforcing. And you're not going to be perfect at it. You almost need to fail a certain number of times before you get good at it. There's this Japanese proverb, and I think Angela Duckworth used it in her book, Grit.
Right. Yeah.
She talked about it only in one way in terms of resilience. So it says fall 7, rise 8. But the question she doesn't put in the book is, well, why 7? Why 8?
Right.
Why not fall 2, fall 1? And when you look at that proverb and sort of the origins of it from, in terms of how the Japanese came up with it, is that they actually believed that you needed to fail at something a certain number of times before you became enlightened about how to do it correctly. And so if I told you, Carl, all right, you need to hit 1,000 shank drives before the light bulb is going to turn on, and you quit after 500, you didn't rise up enough times.
Right.
And so mistakes are how we learn. So in many ways, we want to make sure that we're committed to continuing to make the good mistakes, right? So to me, a good mistake is I'm trying to do the right thing. A bad mistake is I'm avoiding doing the right thing. So maybe you see this I see this with some of the teams I work with, whether it be soccer or field hockey. Players get really nervous, and what do? They pass the ball backwards. They're afraid to go forward. They're afraid to take somebody on one-on-one. What did they learn in that moment? Nothing.
Right.
The only thing they might have learned is, well, I shouldn't do that all the time. I need to try that other thing, And so I think sometimes plateaus come as a result of some of that. But, I know you had that question. So was there a particular thing scenario you were thinking of with respect to plateaus?
You answered it perfectly, in my opinion, because one of the things that I want to tell you guys a silly story real quick. It's only take about 5 seconds. Is to what you said, I'm going to give up is I was playing in a golf league one time with my dad, and I played with this guy who bought a brand new hybrid, and he was so excited to use it. We get out there, he hit it about 3 times. At the end of the round, we had all finished up. He comes back, and this gentleman comes up, and he goes, "Hey, so-and-so, how'd you hit the new club today?" He was like, "Terrible. It's going back on eBay tonight." You know what I mean? Like, just not even giving the club the chance. Because you think it's like
three shots is not a huge data sample, right?
And this is a grown man. But I mean, to your points though, what I watched the other night was Magic and Bird the documentary on their relationship. And the documentary is well done. It's brilliant on how these two guys came up together in their mirror images of themselves on the court.
Yeah.
But off the court, they're polar opposites. And the one thing that I wish that our society did is they focused more on the practice, the effort, the overcoming adversity, the resilience that athletes and high performers in any industry have. Because we all think that you just walk, these guys like MJ walked out on the court one day and was MJ, when most people don't know that he didn't make his high school basketball team, you know. And I just wish that our society focused more on that. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay just because you're like today, I'm a better speaker than I was 5-10 years ago, you know, and it took a lot of practice for me to even be able to do what we're doing today. You know what I mean? And I just wish that people realize that if you're not good at something right now, it doesn't mean they're going to be, you're not always going to be the same person. It's only if you give up.
Yeah, that's right. You know, it's a couple of things come to mind as you're talking there. You know, one is our society is super focused on talent, and it doesn't focus on how that talent got made, right? So, and it's not talent per se. So we want to make sure we understand the journey. Mm-hmm. And let's go back to Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. She has like these little, very simple mathematical formulas. So she says like talent plus effort equals skill. Skill plus effort equals achievement. So her theme there is effort counts twice. But talent alone without effort means nothing. You know, and you've probably even seen that just in your life. Probably some kid on one of your teams, super talented, but doesn't try so hard and then doesn't really achieve much, doesn't develop as a player. So we have to learn to appreciate that journey. And getting back to the plateau thing, like if we look at the kind of the shape of the curve of, you know, let's say you start here, you know, and this is like 5 years later, you know, it's not like boom, straight line to success. There's going to be some down things, like as you learn, then there's going to be a little bit of an up, then there might be a plateau, like where, okay, I'm just working with what I have right now and I'm repeating and repeating and repeating. And then I'm becoming better at that. Now that opens up a little bit more proficiency and I can have a bump, or maybe I learned something new. And I'm just going to struggle with that, right? So it's kind of a series of, you know, ups, plateaus, ups and downs as you get up to your goal. The key, though, like back to something you said earlier, is to have a goal that you're looking toward and to have a plan. Because I would maybe put myself in this category as a high school and college athlete. I don't know that I really worked towards specific enough goals, but I played a lot. I practiced a lot. So I got better. The question is, if I had, like you said earlier, a little bit more focus, a little bit better process to what I did on a daily basis, could I have gotten better than I did, right? So maybe I'm here, but maybe with that, I could have been here, right? And there's a big space there, big delta between those two things. So I think, you know, we've kind of wrapped up a lot of different things into that discussion there with the goal setting, understanding the journey, understanding plateaus are not necessarily bad. They're normal and natural, you know, and we got to look at it that way.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And I like, you know, the audience that, you know, I know for Young Legends families that watch these videos, our own coaching staff and our board, one of the things that you just hit on to me was, you already heard me say it. I wanted to be Bobby Orr. I wanted to be Wayne Gretzky, Cam Daly. I wanted to be something that I never reached. And one of the things that I've never really, you know, really discussed a lot, it's taken me a long time to get to this point though, Brian, was saying that part of my issues was I was smaller than most of my peers. I had a very difficult time putting on weight. Yeah. But then again, I didn't do everything I possibly could to get bigger either. I didn't. And the other thing is that mentally, like you had mentioned, that performance anxiety piece, I was putting way too much pressure on myself because I had this unrealistic expectation that I had to be Bobby Orr to make either Division I college or the NHL. And I didn't need to do that. I needed to stay in the game that I was meant to play. In a lot of ways, I wish that I had a coach that said, "Hey, Kyle, let's create some goals." But even then, Brian, I may not have listened to that person either. You know what I mean? Because I was so damn stubborn too. That was my other issue. One last story for you that I'll share with you is I was 13, maybe 14 years old, and I was playing for the Massachusetts satellite program over the summer. And they put us in, we got to work out at Boyle's, which at the time was in Burlington. I don't know if you know Mike Boyle at all. But if you were from the North Shore, you went to the Burlington. And if you were from the South Shore, you went somewhere else. I don't know. But I'm standing there doing the lateral bands, really working my quads and my whole body at that point. But Joe Thornton of the Bruins is working out directly in front of me. And this is how crazy I was. I was like, yeah, this is all great, but I'm going to go home and do my own workout after this because I know what I'm doing, which I didn't. But I mean, it should have registered that, hey, there's Joe Thornton, the captain of the Bruins, doing exactly what I'm doing. Just stick with this. Just keep going with this. And but I don't know why I was like that. I don't know why I was such a stubborn teenage kid who thought he could do everything on his own. I don't know where that comes from because now I'm extremely coachable. I try to get as much information as I can. There's really no question in there, Brian. So just to share a little more about me.
But I think it's actually indicative of a lot of us,
Yeah.
We often go it alone. We often, for some reason, think we know better. And yeah, usually sometime after our 20s, we start to become more open-minded to these kinds of things. And so I think we also have to realize that is a barrier. That is a performance barrier when we are not willing to open up our minds to doing things, in perhaps a better way. You right there had an example of a player who is extremely professional.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's actually a really good, I think, concept to use with young players, like young legends, is there's a difference between a professional and an amateur, right? So when you look at amateur, we look at it, the Latin root is to love, right? So supposedly amateurs love their sport. But the thing is, they don't love it enough or else they'd be pros. Right? And so the idea is, can you go professional in your attitude? And you can't actually become a professional athlete until you go pro with your attitude.
Interesting.
And that means, looking at your diet, your energy, your working out, your mental game is part of your job, part of what you do. That's how you go pro in anything, and then commit to that process. And then no matter what, you do it.
Absolutely.
Just do it some days.
And that's when I just think there's so much you can offer people of all ages. I mean, because there's still people that I work with that I'm mentoring, and I'm like, sometimes I can see their mental blocks coming through or the handicaps. And then I'm like, and then I do my own double check. I'm like, all right, what am I handicapping myself today? What's blocking me from not achieving? And but that's taken a long time to even get to this point in my life, where it's like that. Is there, during this crazy time that we're in of uncertainty, what advice do you have for all of us that are at home, whether you're a youth athlete or just anybody in general, Brian?
I think, first of all, let's maybe address it for the athletes first, right? Okay. Because I think something to recognize is that part of your identity has been taken away. You can't go out and play and practice the way you used to. And you don't have control of that. You don't have control of when it'll come back. And, for me, like as a tennis player, it feels really weird that I haven't played tennis in a few weeks,
Yeah.
except maybe, go hit against a wall like that video
Right.
I produced a few weeks ago. Right. And I've done that a few times, but it's strange. And, that's a big part of my identity, playing golf, playing hockey, maybe a big part of your identity. You're not able to do it. So I think the first thing is let's realize that and know that, feeling a little bit out of control right now, it's normal. It's okay. There may be, a little bit of grief that first went on with that. Now there's probably some frustration setting in because, as of today, it's, April 21st that we're recording this. We've been in this state for a good month or so.
Yeah.
And, now it's people are starting to get frustrated as well. So I think it's good to realize that those are all valid emotions. But in this situation, a lot of that's out of our control. So what can we bring ourselves to focus on that's within our control so that like when things open up again, you feel like you can step back on to the court, the ice, the golf course, and maybe be further ahead than others, right? So you could be doing things like visualization, seeing maybe different skills, right? You could even just visualize, let's say, take a hockey perspective, right? Yep. You were mentioning earlier, kind of playing like street hockey on your own, right? Or just maybe playing in the basement. I used to do that all the time.
Yep.
Just go do something like that, right? But then maybe visualize yourself doing a drill you might do in your basement. See yourself hitting that top shelf with a shot, time after time after time. What's going on in the brain is actually reinforcing that strength and reinforcing that habit. So even though you're not necessarily doing it physically, you're actually making it a stronger habit in your mind. So visualization can be a really helpful thing.
Awesome.
Things like meditation can be also helpful, just to learn to focus your mind, focus on your breathing. If you think about it, your breathing is something you can control. But that's also going to help you when you get back out into your sport, help you be calm and relaxed, help you get back in that present moment, maybe be less judgmental about things. So, maybe you'd be willing to share this, Carl, but I actually put together a training plan for athletes, during this time. And it's written generically. It's not written, for one sport or another. And so athletes of any sport could go in there and get some ideas on things that they could be working on at this time. I think we as coaches also want to emphasize that, hey, just because you're at home and you're not doing anything, it's not a time to like just start jamming, all this activity in.
Right.
Right. Like, oh, you should read 100 books, because you're not doing anything. That's
right.
So we don't want to turn it into like a contest of like how much you can do.
Right.
And so like in that training plan, maybe just pick a couple of things. Because I think with mental skills, they don't take a long time. Like it doesn't take a long time to visualize necessarily, or to do a meditation, or to do something called like a concentration grid. But for it to have any value, it takes consistency. Just like the physical side of practice. You can't, go to Boyle's one day and say, hey, Mike, I'll see you next year for my annual workout.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Right.
And it's the same with the mental skills, right? Just commit to doing it multiple times a week or daily. And you're not going to see necessarily a difference from one day to the next, but you will see a difference in 3 months. You will see a difference in 6 months. You'll be a completely different person. And so that's, when you hear that phrase, trust the process, that's really true with a lot of the mental skills practices, is you've got to just trust that process and not expect it to feel differently tomorrow because I did a meditation yesterday.
Right. That's such a key point, because in today's world with, instant gratification, and we can get anything at any time, during this time of solitude, you're sort of like, okay, I can't go down to the local restaurant and have dinner with friends or family for that matter. And just to remind myself, I started working out, getting myself back in shape. And I constantly have to remind myself that this is a process. If I don't look like I dropped 5 pounds in a day, then, and that comes back to that point of consistency too, being able to do it over adapting over adapting, and I just think that as much as we live in a world that technology is excellent and helpful, at the same time, sometimes we lose the fact that things that are really important to us, like getting an A on a test, making our high school, college, making the pros, is a long journey. It's a long process. It just doesn't come overnight. More than,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And the big part of that is, that journey is a process of learning, right?
Yeah.
Because I could even argue getting an A is less important than I learned actually the subject matter.
Right. Exactly. That's another great point. In that, I mean, that's where our metrics, that's for a whole nother day. I don't want to share my opinion with that, but I did want to ask you, where can we find you online, and sort of to sum up, tell us a little bit about your program and how people can find you.
Sure. So the website is performanceextra.com. So there's only one E in there. So it's not performance EXT, it's just xtra.com. I do a lot on the blog there, right? So if you're interested in kind of reading a little bit more about my philosophy, so it's a combination of, sports psychology, positive psychology type things, often geared toward the tennis player, but not always. And I think even if you were to read a sort of tennis-oriented blog post, you could extract information out of that. I do a lot of private work with students. So, if people are interested in that, you can always email me at brian@performanceextra.com. And I have a very specific initial 3-month training program that I go through with athletes. So, initially we'll look at, that athlete's specific needs, but they're going to learn things like confidence, focus, motivation, a lot of things that we talked about, dealing with anxiety.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't really get into though, Carl, but it's a really big part of the program, are routines.
Routines. Okay. Yep.
Right. So helping athletes build pre-game routines, in-game routines, post-game routines, those types of things. You might even have, let's say, in hockey, maybe you have a very specific, maybe we want to develop a face-off routine, right? So that you're completely focused before the face-off, something like that. So that's a big part of it, working with your strengths. So, if people are interested in that, feel free to email or call. The info is on the website. I also have an online training program that people, if they wanted to do that, that this could be an interesting time for that. You can self-pace through that. It's called the Great Competitor Formula, right? So it's really about building a great competitor. I think there's something like 33 different lessons in there, 7 modules plus some bonus things. So there's a lot to it. It would probably take somebody about 3 or 4 months to go through all of the content, but that could be a good option. And then I also do, speaking engagements and working with teams. A lot of the work I do are with teams at different schools, field hockey, soccer, swim teams, track and field, obviously tennis teams and tennis players. So a lot of work on those things. And so that might be a little bit more in-person type of work.
Where I know Candace sent me a text the other day of your book. Where could I get a copy of it, or other people?
Yeah, so the book's on Amazon. So you can get it in either paperback or Kindle format. Yeah, so that's the place to get that. So it'd be great if, I think the book, I'm really proud of what's in there, because I think for me, it's a lot of things that I've just learned in my journey through, from being a 10-year-old tennis player to a 52-year-old one, and somebody who's gotten into different philosophies and perspectives. And it's really just all meant to help you develop mindsets and perspectives that allow you to handle anything.
Absolutely. And just to sort of sum up on this, is that I've always, I've wondered about this, do you believe that sports build our character, or do they reveal our character?
I think they reveal, right? So the reason for that, and we can give you a good, an example, and I think the research studies actually show it, that one thing that happens as you become better and you get into more of a win at all costs type of environment, that sport actually harms character.
Okay.
So they did a study on this at the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, because at the military academy, everyone has to play either an intercollegiate sport or an intramural sport. But they're also at the same time receiving courses in values education, right? Teaching them character things. And so what they did is they tracked a class of freshmen for 4 years, and they wanted to see how their moral functioning developed over the course of those 4 years. And in general, their moral functioning went down.
Interesting.
And a lot of it was due to the coach's perceptions of you have to win. And very often that then feeds into some unethical behavior. So it's really important we as coaches understand that the sport does not teach character. The sport itself is neutral. One person may react by cheating. One person may react by following the rules. What helps sport to build character is the environment that we as parents and coaches kind of overlay with that sport. So if you're going to go into, young legends and say, we have to win this game, I want you to take that kid out, slash him in the ankle, he's their best player, get him out of the game. That's not teaching character, and that's coming from you, right? But that could easily happen. And we've seen things like that occur in sports where players are told to intentionally target and harm others, right? There was that bounty controversy in the NFL.
That's right.
New Orleans Saints.
Yeah.
But if you can be teaching your athletes about respect, fairness, compassion and kindness, justice, how we, relate to each other in a proper way, then yes, you can say that sport is helping to teach character, but it really comes from the coach and you also having the parents be bought into, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And a lot of this comes under the philosophy of positive coaching.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I've taken up a lot of your time, as I usually do with these type of conversations, is last year in our playoffs was a great example of what's important to you. What's important to me is probably very different from what the coaches do, because as the league president and the person who's created this vision, and obviously it's evolved, and I have a group of a board that advises a lot of things now. New ideas come out through these individuals that I'm grateful to. Mm-hmm. We want a league that has a lot of parity. Teams are equal. We want kids to develop their skills. We want them to have fun in competition. And our playoffs get really intense because there's only one trophy and there's only individual trophies for the winning team. There isn't any participation award. It's just if you win it, you get it. If not, you're over. And there was a situation last year in our playoffs that is a great coaching example that we can really work with our staff. There was a young man who was new to the program this year, which was last year now, and they were really, really close. It was a really close game. It was tight. Both coaches wanted it badly. It was the first time that we had a dynasty team not be in the championship game. And this one player was probably 11, 12 years old, had an opportunity to shoot in an open net. Now, it wasn't a perfect situation where he just had to lob it in, but it was a very great opportunity where I could shoot it right in the net. The goalie was out of position. He had